brought to you by WikiVidi documentaries. Millennials. Millennials are the demographic cohort following Generation X. There are no precise dates for when this cohort starts or ends. Demographers and researchers typically use the early 1980s as starting birth years, and the mid-1990s to early 2000s as ending birth years. Millennials, who are generally the children of baby boomers and older Gen Xers, are sometimes referred to as echo boomers, due to a major surge in birth rates in the 1980s and 1990s. The 20th century trend towards smaller families in developed countries continued, however, so the relative impact of the baby boom echo was generally less pronounced than the original post-World War II boom. Millennial characteristics vary by region, depending on social and economic conditions. However, the generation is generally marked by an increased use and familiarity with communications, media, and digital technologies. In most parts of the world, their upbringing was marked by an increase in a liberal approach to politics and economics. The effects of this environment are disputed. The Great Recession has had a major impact on this generation, because it has caused historically high levels of unemployment among young people, and has led to speculation about possible long-term economic and social damage to this generation. Terminology. Authors William Strauss and Neil Howe are widely credited with naming the Millennials. They coined the term in 1987, around the time children born in 1982 were entering preschool, and the media were first identifying their prospective link to the new millennium as the high school graduating class of 2000. They wrote about the cohort in their books Generations, The History of America's Future, 1584 to 2069, and Millennials Rising, The Next Great Generation, in August 1993. An Advertising Age editorial coined the phrase Generation Y to describe those who were aged 11 or younger, as well as the teenagers of the upcoming 10 years who were defined as different from Generation X. According to journalist Bruce Horowitz, in 2012, Ad Age threw in the towel by conceding that Millennials is a better name than Gen Y, and by 2014, a past director of data strategy at Ad Age said to NPR, "The Generation Y label was a placeholder until we found out more about them." Millennials are sometimes called echo boomers, due to them being the offspring of the baby boomers, and due to the significant increase in birth rates from the early 1980s to mid-1990s, mirroring that of their parents. In the United States, birth rates peaked in August 1990, and a 20th century trend towards smaller families in developed countries continued. In his book The Lucky Few, Between the Greatest Generation and the Baby Boom, author Elwood Carlson called this cohort the New Boomers. Psychologist Jean Twenge described Millennials as Generation Me in her 2006 book Generation Me: Why Today's Young Americans Are More Confident, Assertive, Entitled, and More Miserable Than Ever Before, which was updated in 2014. In 2013, Time magazine ran a cover story titled Millennials, the Me Generation. Newsweek used the term Generation 9/11 to refer to young people who were between the ages of 10 and 20 years during the terrorist acts of the 11th of September 2001. The first reference to Generation 9/11 was made in the cover story of the 12th of November 2001 issue of Newsweek. Alternative names for this group proposed include Generation We, Global Generation, Generation Next, and the Net Generation. Chinese millennials are commonly called the 1980s and 1990s generations. at a 2015 conference in Shanghai organized by University of Southern California's U.S.-China Institute. Millennials in China were examined and contrasted with American millennials. Findings included millennials' marriage, childbearing, and child-raising preferences, life and career ambitions, and attitudes towards volunteerism and activism. Date and age range defining. A minority of demographers and researchers start the generation in the mid to late 1970s, such as Synchrony Financial, which describes millennials as starting as early as 1976. Mobilize.org, which uses 1976 to 1996, MetLife, which uses birth dates ranging from 1977 to 1994, and Nielsen Media Research, which uses 1977 to 1995. The majority of researchers and demographers start the generation in the early 1980s, with many ending the generation in the mid-1990s. Australia's McCrindle research regards 1980 to 1994 as Generation Y birth years. A 2013 PricewaterhouseCoopers report and Edelman Berland use 1980 to 1995. Gallup Inc., Eventbrite, and Dale Carnegie Training and MSW Research all use 1980 to 1996. Ernst & Young uses 1981 to 1996. Manpower Group uses 1982 to 1996. Others end the generation in the late 1990s or early 2000s. A 2017 viral video from BuzzFeed, detailing the 7 living generations of Americans, described millennials as those born between 1981 to 1997. On the American television program Survivor, for their 33rd season, subtitled Millennials vs. Gen X. The Millennial tribe consisted of individuals born between 1984 and 1997. Goldman Sachs, Resolution Foundation, and a 2013 Time magazine cover story all use 1980 to 2000. Syzygy, a digital service agency partially owned by WPP, uses 1981 to 1998. And the United States Census Bureau uses 1982 to 2000. Pew Research Center defines millennials as being born from 1981 onwards, with no chronological endpoint set yet. Demographers William Strauss and Neil Howe define millennials as born between 1982 to 2004. However, Howe described the dividing line between millennials and the following Generation Z as tentative, saying, "You can't be sure where history will someday draw a cohort dividing line until a generation fully comes of age." He noted that the millennials range beginning in 1982 would point to the next generation's window, starting between 2000 and 2006. In his 2008 book The Lucky Few, Between the Greatest Generation and the Baby Boom, author Elwood Carlson defined this cohort as born between 1983 to 2001 based on the upswing in births after 1983 and finishing with the political and social challenges that occurred after the September 11 terrorist acts. In 2016, USPIA described millennials as those born between 1983 and 2000. Due to birth year overlap between definitions of Generation X and millennials, some individuals born in the late 1970s and early 1980s see themselves as being between the two generations. Names given to those born in the Generation X and Millennial cusp years include Zennials, the Lucky Ones, Generation Catalano, and the Oregon Trail Generation. Traits. Authors William Strauss, and Neil Howe believe that each generation has common characteristics that give it a specific character, with 4 basic generational archetypes, repeating in a cycle. According to the hypothesis, they predicted millennials will become more like the civic-minded GI generation, with a strong sense of community, both local and global. Strauss and Howe ascribe 7 basic traits to the millennial cohort: special, sheltered, confident, team-oriented, conventional, pressured, and achieving. Arthur E. Levine, author of When Hope and Fear Collide, a portrait of today's college student, describes these generational images as stereotypes. Strauss and Howe's research has been influential, but it also has critics. Psychologist Jean Twenge says Strauss and Howe's assertions are overly deterministic, non-falsifiable, and unsupported by rigorous evidence. Twenge, the author of the 2006 book Generation Me, considers millennials, along with younger members of Generation X, to be part of what she calls Generation Me. Twenge attributes millennials with the traits of confidence and tolerance, but also describes a sense of entitlement and narcissism, based on personality surveys showing increased narcissism among millennials compared to preceding generations when they were teens and in their 20s. She questions the predictions of Strauss and how that this generation will turn out civic-minded. A 2016 study by Syzygy, a digital service agency, found millennials in the U.S. continue to exhibit elevated scores on the narcissistic personality inventory as they age, finding millennials exhibited 16% more narcissism than older adults, with males scoring higher on average than females. The study examined 2 types of narcissism: grandiose narcissism, described as the narcissism of extroverts, characterized by attention-seeking behavior, power, and dominance, and vulnerable narcissism, described as the narcissism of introverts, characterized by an acute sense of self-entitlement and defensiveness. The University of Michigan's Monitoring the Future study of high school seniors and the American Freshman Survey, conducted by UCLA's Higher Education Research Institute of new college students since 1966, showed an increase in the proportion of students who consider wealth a very important attribute, from 45% for baby boomers to 70% for Gen Xers, and 75% for millennials. The percentage who said it was important to keep abreast of political affairs fell, from 50% for baby boomers to 39% for Gen Xers, and 35% for millennials. The notion of developing a meaningful philosophy of life decreased the most across generations, from 73% for boomers to 45% for millennials. The willingness to be involved in an environmental cleanup program dropped from 33% for baby boomers to 21% for millennials. A 2013 Pew Research poll found that 84% of millennials born since 1980, who were at that time between the ages of 18 and 32, favored legalizing the use of marijuana. In 2015, the Pew Research Center also conducted research regarding generational identity that said a majority did not like the millennial label. In March 2014, the Pew Research Center issued a report about how millennials in adulthood are detached from institutions and networked with friends. The report said millennials are somewhat more upbeat than older adults about America's future, with 49% of millennials saying the country's best years are ahead, though they're the first in the modern era to have higher levels of student loan debt and unemployment. Fred Bonner, a Samuel Jewett Proctor Chair in Education at Rutgers University, and author of Diverse Millennial Students in College: Implications for Faculty and Student Affairs, believes that much of the commentary on the millennial generation may be partially accurate, but overly general, and that many of the traits they describe apply primarily to white, affluent teenagers who accomplish great things as they grow up in the suburbs, who confront anxiety when applying to super-selective colleges, and who multitask with ease as their helicopter parents hover reassuringly above them. During class discussions, Bonner listened to Black and Hispanic students describe how some or all of the so-called core traits did not apply to them. They often said that the special trait, in particular, is unrecognizable. Other socio-economic groups often do not display the same attributes commonly attributed to millennials. It's not that many diverse parents don't want to treat their kids as special, he says, but they often don't have the social and cultural capital, the time and resources to do that. In his book Fast Future, author David Burstein describes millennials' approach to social change as pragmatic idealism, with a deep desire to make the world a better place, combined with an understanding that doing so requires building new institutions while working inside and outside existing institutions. Workplace attitudes. There are vast and conflicting amounts of literature and empirical studies discussing the existence of generational differences as it pertains to the workplace. The majority of research concludes millennials differ from both their generational cohort predecessors, and can be characterized by a preference for a flat corporate culture, an emphasis on work-life balance and social consciousness. According to authors from Florida International University, original research performed by Howe and Strauss as well as Ewan Miller suggests baby boomers resonate primarily with loyalty, work ethic, steady career path, and compensation when it comes to their professional lives. Generation X, on the other hand, started shifting preferences towards an improved work-life balance, with a heightened focus on individualistic advancement, stability, and job satisfaction. Meanwhile, millennials place an emphasis on producing meaningful work, finding a creative outlet, and have a preference for immediate feedback. Findings also suggest the introduction of social media has augmented collaborative skills and created a preference for a team-oriented environment. In the 2010 The Journal of Business and Psychology, contributors Myers and Sadagiani find millennials expect close relationships and frequent feedback from supervisors to be a main point of differentiation. Multiple studies observe millennials associating job satisfaction with free flow of information, strong connectivity to supervisors, and more immediate feedback. Herschatter and Epstein, researchers from Emory University, argue a lot of these traits can be linked to millennials entering the educational system on the cusp of academic reform, which created a much more structured educational system. Some argue in the wake of these reforms, such as the No Child Left Behind Act, millennials have increasingly sought the aid of mentors and advisors, leading to 66% of millennials seeking a flat work environment. Herschatter and Epstein also stress a growing importance on work-life balance. Studies show nearly one-third of students' top priority is to balance personal and professional life. The Brain Drain study shows nearly 9 out of 10 millennials place an importance on work-life balance, with additional surveys demonstrating the generation to favor familial over corporate values. Studies also show a preference for work-life balance, which contrasts to the baby boomers' work-centric attitude. Data also suggests millennials are driving a shift towards the public service sector. In 2010, Myers and Sadagiani published research in the Journal of Business and psychology stating heightened participation in the Peace Corps and Merit Corps as a result of millennials, with volunteering being at all-time highs. Volunteer activity between 2007 and 2008 show the millennial age group experienced almost 3 times the increase of the overall population, which is consistent with a survey of 130 college upperclassmen depicting an emphasis on altruism in their upbringing. This has led, according to a Harvard University Institute of Politics, 6 out of 10 millennials to consider a career in public service. The 2014 Brookings publication shows a generational adherence to corporate social responsibility, with the National Society of High School Scholars 2013 survey and Universum's 2011 survey, depicting a preference to work for companies engaged in the betterment of society. Millennials' shift in attitudes has led to data depicting 64% of millennials would take a 60% pay cut to pursue a career path aligned with their passions, and financial institutions have fallen out of favor, with banks comprising 40% of the generation's least liked brands. In 2008, author Ron Alsop called the millennials trophy kids, a term that reflects a trend in competitive sports, as well as many other aspects of life, where mere participation is frequently enough for a reward. It has been reported that this is an issue in corporate environments. Some employers are concerned that millennials have too great expectations from the workplace. Some studies predict they will switch jobs frequently, holding many more jobs than Gen Xers due to their great expectations. Psychologist Jean Twenge reports data suggests there are differences between older and younger millennials regarding workplace expectations, with younger millennials being more practical and more attracted to industries with steady work, and are more likely to say they are willing to work overtime, which Twenge attributes to younger millennials coming of age following the financial crisis of 2007-2008. There is also a contention that the major differences are found solely between millennials and Generation X. Researchers from the University of Missouri and the University of Tennessee conducted a study based on measurement equivalence to determine if such a difference does in fact exist. The study looked at 1860 participants who had completed the multidimensional work ethic profile, a survey aimed at measuring identification with work ethic characteristics across a 12-year period spanning from 1996 to 2008. The results of the findings suggest the main difference in work ethic sentiments arose between the 2 most recent generational cohorts, Generation X and Millennials, with relatively small variances between the 2 generations and their predecessor, the Baby Boomers. That said, some research fails to find convincing differences. A meta-study conducted by researchers from the George Washington University and the U.S. Army Research Institute for the Behavioral and Social Sciences questions the validity of workplace differences across any generational cohort. According to the researchers, disagreement in which events to include when assigning generational cohorts, as well as varied opinions on which age ranges to include in each generational category, are the main drivers behind their skepticism. The analysis of 20 research reports focusing on the 3 work-related factors of job satisfaction, organizational commitment and intent to turn over proved any variation was too small to discount the impact of employee tenure and aging of individuals. Newer research shows that millennials changed jobs for the same reasons as other generations, namely, more money and a more innovative work environment. They look for versatility and flexibility in the workplace, and strive for a strong work-life balance in the jobs and have similar career aspirations to other generations, valuing financial security and a diverse workplace just as much as their older colleagues. Political views. Surveys of political attitudes among millennials in the United Kingdom have suggested increasingly social liberal views, as well as higher overall support for classical liberal economic policies than preceding generations. They are more likely to support same-sex marriage and the legalization of drugs. The Economist parallels this with millennials in the United States, whose attitudes are more supportive of social liberal policies and same-sex marriage relative to other demographics. They are also more likely to oppose animal testing for medical purposes than older generations. Bernie Sanders, a self-proclaimed Democratic socialist and Democratic candidate in the 2016 United States presidential election, was the most popular candidate among millennial voters in the primary phase, having garnered more votes from people under 30 in 21 states than the major parties' candidates, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, did combined. In April 2016, The Washington Post viewed him as changing the way millennials viewed politics, saying, "He's not moving a party to the left. He's moving a generation to the left." Bernie Sanders referred to millennials as the least prejudiced generation in the history of the United States. In the United Kingdom, the majority of millennials opposed the British withdrawal from the European Union, blaming baby boomers, who largely supported the referendum. One commenter said, "The younger generation has lost the right to live and work in 27 other countries. We will never know the full extent of the lost opportunities, friendships, marriages, and experiences we will be denied." The Washington Post phrased this as, "We let you steal our future," reporting high voter turnout among those over 55 years of age, and low voter turnout among those under 34 years of age. A 2014 poll for the Libertarian Reason magazine suggested that American millennials were social liberals and fiscal centrists, more often than their global peers. The magazine predicted that millennials would become more conservative on fiscal issues once they started paying taxes. Political correctness. Millennials have brought a resurgence of political correctness. In 2015, a Pew Research study found 40% of millennials in the United States supported government restriction of public speech offensive to minority groups. Support for restricting offensive speech was significantly lower among older generations, with 27% of Gen Xers, 24% of baby boomers, and only 12% of the silent generation supporting such restrictions. Pew Research noted similar age-related trends in the United Kingdom, but not in Germany and Spain, where millennials were less supportive of restricting offensive speech than older groups. Millennials have brought changes to higher education in the US and the UK via drawing attention to microaggressions and lobbying for implementation of safe spaces and trigger warnings in the university setting. Critics of such changes have raised concerns regarding their impact on free speech, asserting these changes can promote censorship, while proponents have described these changes as promoting inclusiveness. Demographics in the United States. Millennial population size varies, depending on the definition used. William Strauss and Neil Howe projected in the 1991 book Generations that the U.S. millennial population would be 76 million. Later, using dates ranging from 1982 to 2004, Neil Howe revised the number to over 95 million people. In a 2012 Time magazine article, It was estimated that there were approximately 80 million U.S. millennials. The United States Census Bureau, using birth dates ranging from 1982 to 2000, stated the estimated number of U.S. millennials in 2015 was 83.1 million people. In 2016, the Pew Research Center found that millennials surpassed baby boomers to become the largest living generation in the United States. By analyzing 2015 U.S. Census data, they found there were 75.4 million millennials. Based on Pew's definition of the generation, which ranges from 1981 to 1997, compared to 74.9 million baby boomers. Economic prospects. Economic prospects for some millennials have declined largely due to the Great Recession in the late 2000s. Several governments have instituted major youth employment schemes out of fear of social unrest due to the dramatically increased rates of youth unemployment. In Europe, youth unemployment levels were very high. In 2009, leading commentators began to worry about the long-term social and economic effects of the unemployment. Unemployment levels in other areas of the world were also high, with the youth unemployment rate in the US reaching a record 19.1% in July 2010. Since the statistics started being gathered in 1948. In Canada, unemployment among youths in July 2009 was 15.9%, the highest it had been in 11 years. Underemployment is also a major factor. In the U.S., the economic difficulties have led to dramatic increases in youth poverty, unemployment, and the numbers of young people living with their parents. In April 2012, it was reported that half of all new college graduates in the U.S. were still either unemployed or underemployed. It has been argued that this unemployment rate and poor economic situation has given millennials a rallying call with the 2011 Occupy Wall Street movement. However, according to Christine Kelly, Occupy is not a youth movement and has participants that vary from the very young to very old. A variety of names have emerged in various European countries hard hit following the financial crisis of 2007-2008 to designate young people with limited employment and career prospects. These groups can be considered to be more or less synonymous with millennials, or at least major subgroups in those countries. The generation of €700 is a term popularized by the Greek mass media, and refers to educated Greek twixters of urban centers who generally fail to establish a career. In Greece, young adults are being excluded from the labor market, and some leave their country of origin to look for better options. They're being marginalized and face uncertain working conditions in jobs that are unrelated to their educational background, and receive the minimum allowable base salary of €700 per month. This generation evolved in circumstances leading to the Greek debt crisis, and some participated in the 2010-2011 Greek protests. In Spain, they're referred to as the Millennialista, in France, the precarious generation, and as in Spain. Italy also has the Millennialista generation of €1,000. In 2015, millennials in New York City were reported as earning 20% less than the generation before them, as a result of entering the workforce during the Great Recession. Despite higher college attendance rates than Generation X, many were stuck in low-paid jobs, with the percentage of degree-educated young adults working in low-wage industries rising from 23% to 33% between 2000 and 2014. In 2016, research from the Resolution Foundation found millennials in the UK earned £8,000 less in their 20s than Generation X. describing millennials as on course to become the first generation to earn less than the one before. Generation flux is a neologism and psychographic designation coined by Fast Company for American employees who need to make several changes in career throughout their working lives. Due to the chaotic nature of the job market following the Great Recession, societal change has been accelerated by the use of social media, smartphones, mobile computing, and other new technologies. Those in Generation Flux have birth years in the ranges of both Generation X and Millennials. Generation Cell was used by author William D. Rusovich to describe millennials' interest in small businesses. Millennials are expected to make up approximately half of the U.S. workforce by 2020. Millennials are the most highly educated and culturally diverse group of all generations, and have been regarded as hard to please when it comes to employers. To address these new challenges, many large firms are currently studying the social and behavioral patterns of millennials, and are trying to devise programs that decrease intergenerational estrangement and increase relationships of reciprocal understanding between older employees and millennials. The UK's Institute of Leadership and Management researched the gap in understanding between millennial recruits and their managers in collaboration with Ashridge Business School. The findings included high expectations for advancement, salary and for a coaching relationship with their manager, and suggested that organizations will need to adapt to accommodate and make the best use of millennials. In an example of a company trying to do just this, Goldman Sachs conducted training programs that used actors to portray millennials who assertively sought more feedback, responsibility, and involvement in decision-making. After the performance, employees discussed and debated the generational differences they saw played out. Millennials have benefited the least from the economic recovery following the Great Recession, as average incomes for this generation have fallen at twice the general adult population's total drop, and are likely to be on a path toward lower incomes for at least another decade. A Bloomberg LP article wrote that, 3.5 years after the worst recession since the Great Depression, the earnings and employment gap between those in the under 35 population and their parents and grandparents threatens to unravel the American dream of each generation doing better than the last. The nation's younger workers have benefited least from an economic recovery that has been the most uneven in recent history. In 2014, millennials were entering an increasingly multi-generational workplace. Even though research has shown that millennials are joining the workforce during a tough economic time, they still have remained optimistic, as shown when about 9 out of 10 millennials surveyed by the Pew Research Center said that they currently have enough money, or that they will eventually reach their long-term financial goals. Thank you for watching. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Please like and subscribe below. Please like and subscribe below.